20 cases were Washington, state of Washington, California with 10 cases, Illinois 3 cases, and then you've got Oregon, Massachusetts, Arizona, and Wisconsin with 1 case each. And that started around January 21. By January 31st, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services declared a public health emergency, and the U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention issued a federal quarantine for 14 days, affecting the 195 American evacuees from Wuhan, China, and all other people who had visited China were asked to self-quarantine. By February 2nd, President Trump ordered the U.S. to deny entry into the U.S. by foreign nationals who traveled to China within the 2 preceding weeks and temporarily suspended all flights to China. United cut 24 flights, American suspended flights to from LA to Shanghai, and Delta also cut some flights, but not all flights. So they were not closed, the doors weren't closed in total to China or to any place else as of February 2nd. By February 25th, the Center for Disease Control warned the US public to prepare for a local outbreak. On March 3rd, the Federal Reserve lowered the targeted interest rate down to 1.25%. The lack of testing masked the real problem, and it went below, I mean, we didn't even have 10,000 people tested as of March 10th. Go back 1 slide. Okay, there you go. All right, now we're back on the same page. On March 13th, a national emergency was declared by the FDA, and they allowed public health agencies and private companies to test for the virus and to allow anyone with a doctor's order to be tested. By the end of March, 1,000 people were tested. Mid-March, Trump started purchasing large quantities of medical equipment. And the administration used the Defense Production Act to direct industries to produce medical equipment. Federal health inspectors surveyed hospitals, reporting shortages of tests supplied and personal protective equipment. By March 16th, the White House advised against gatherings of 10 people or more and suggested social distancing. By March 18th, Trump announced the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development would suspend all kinds of foreclosures and evictions until the end of April. By March 19th, the U.S. Department of State advised U.S. citizens to avoid all international travel restrictions and placed on people who had traveled to Iran and 28 different countries, European countries. The Federal Housing Financial Association ordered federally guaranteed loan providers to grant forbearance for up to 1 year on mortgage payments for people who lost income due to the virus. Next page. Next page. March 21st, the governors of New York and California and other large states ordered most businesses to close and for people to stay inside with limited exceptions. Financial institutions, some retailers, pharmacies, hospitals, manufacturing plants, and transportation companies were all exempted. They didn't have to close their doors. But you had all the restaurants and hotels, etc., all had to be closed. And that started, now you've got to remember, at the federal level, Trump can't order that. Each state has to order their citizens to go under lockdown. So it's the governor of the state who is in charge and advising their constituents what to do and what businesses to close and what businesses not to close. Trump can, unless he makes an executive order, he doesn't really have a whole lot. He can make suggestions, and then it's up to the governors to actually decide who does what where and how the state is going to manage their people and the virus. Okay, and that's right now they have a real problem because Trump wants everybody to open up their doors, and quite a few states are saying, "No way, Jose, we're not going to come out of the lockdown." They want to maintain the lockdown. So it's a big. You see protests and everything. You've got protesters who are protesting the protesters. You've got, I mean, it's just, you know, back in the 70s, the Vietnam War, it's all coming out again. These people are crazy. Anyway, So let's keep going. March 21, the governors of New York and California and other large states ordered most businesses closed. Okay, by March 22nd, Trump sent in the National Guard to California, New York, and Washington to set up large medical stations with thousands of beds. Chicago rented more than 1,000 empty hotel rooms to house coronavirus victims who needed to be isolated but did not require hospitalization. The part of the National Guard was the U.S. Navy ship Mercy arrived in Los Angeles on March 27th, and the U.S. Navy ship Comfort arrived in New York on March 30th. By the way, the Comfort has already left New York. It's no longer needed, and the same thing with the Mercy in Los Angeles. The hospitals are now able to deal with the cases, evidently, so they don't need the ships there anymore. Anyway, March 28th, Trump did not order a tri-state lockdown of New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. Instead, he issued a travel advisory, but each state, both New York State, New Jersey, and Connecticut, tried to enforce a lockdown and stopped people at the border from going into New York or, going across state lines, okay? And that is, again, something that some states locked down their borders and others didn't. So it's not something that Trump advised. In fact, he made fun of the governors who issued those type of orders. But again, those states are doing a whole lot better than the states that didn't. April 11th, the federal government approved disaster declarations for all states and territories. State and local responses to the outbreak have included prohibitions, cancellations of large-scale gatherings, restrictions on commerce and movement, closure of schools and other educational facilities. Remember, that's all done at the state level. It's not necessarily mandated at the federal level. At the federal level, he can request it, but it's the state level who has to implement it, okay? By April 20th, 4 million people were tested. Now let's go to the aid package. On March 6th, Coronavirus Preparedness and Response Appropriations Act was implemented, which provides $8.3 billion to fight the pandemic. No, you don't go to the CARES Act. Go back to another slide. Back another slide. One more. Okay, there you go. Stay right there. Okay. Over $3 billion for research and development of vaccines, $2.2 billion for the Center for Disease Control, and $950 million to support state and local health agencies. Now, when it comes to supporting state and local health agencies, that's very small money. They need a lot more money than that. On March 18th, there was another act that was passed. It's called the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, and it provides emergency leave and food assistance to be provided to affected employees along with free testing. And then on March 25th, the CARES Act was implemented, and this is the big tax act that was passed, providing $2 trillion to the American public and businesses, $500 billion loans to larger businesses such as airlines. And all of these loans that are being provided, they do not have to start repaying these loans until 2 years after the coronavirus has ended, okay? So these are pretty good packages, actually. So $350 billion for small business loans, $250 billion for individuals, $250 billion for unemployment insurance, and $150 billion for state and municipal governments. That is much more like it. That's a much better act that was passed. So now let's look at the next one. There are still, the next slide deals with other proposals by Congress not yet passed. Now these are a little bit far off in left field. I can't imagine some of these being implemented, but March 13th, Ro Khan and Tim Ryan suggested legislation which provided payments to low-income citizens in the form of an earned income tax credit. By March 18th, the U.S. House Committee on Financial Services released a stimulus proposal that the Federal Reserve would fund monthly payments, okay, monthly payments of at least $2,000 for every adult, an additional $1,000 for each child for each month of the crisis, and suspend all consumer and small business credit payments. In other words, you wouldn't have to pay off your credit cards, and you're getting money in the bank for $1,000 for each child and $2,000 for every individual adult on a monthly basis. Okay, that has not been passed. Another piece of legislation was suggested where they're sending preloaded $2,000 debit cards to every American with a $1,000 monthly payment thereafter until the economy recovers. Okay, and this is supposed to be funded with the U.S. Treasury minting 2 trillion US dollar coins. And Mr. Rashid Talib was the one who suggested that. Bernie Sanders called for monthly basic income to help every person in the U.S., including undocumented homeless, the unbanked, and young adults excluded from the CARES Act. On April 14th, the legislation would provide $2,000 in monthly payments. Oh no, that's not for 15 years. I'm sorry, that's wrong. I'm not sure what that 15 years is all about. Oh, to 15-year-olds. It's supposed to be 16-year-olds. Sorry, to 16-year-olds and older Americans making less than $130,000 per year. And there was another piece of legislation that was suggested that would cancel rent and home mortgage payments for a year. Okay, none of those thoughts have been turned into law as of this stage yet. What the next act, the next slide, please. Okay, this is the CARES Act is the one that was passed and is probably the biggest tax act that's hit the U.S. Government in a long time. Okay, it's mainly in 2 areas. It's called the economic impact payments to taxpayers of $1,200, and this is not per month. This is a one-time hit, $1,200. If you qualify for individual or head of household, I mean, if you qualify for the payment. You've got individuals, head of household, and married filing joint, $2,400. All you need to get it is a social security number, and if you have, for individuals who earn less than $75,000, they will get it. If they earn between $75,000 and $99,000 per year, their $1,200 will decrease until it wipes out altogether if you're earning $99,000 a year. Now they're basing this on the earnings that you had in either 2018 or 2019. If you haven't filed your 2019 return, they're using your 2018 return to determine whether or not you're qualified to get this payment. There's, you know, if you are head of household, it means in order to file head of household, you have to be have children. So they're giving it the $1,200 will go to the household for any individual who is filing their U.S. return as head of household, and it will be phased out if they have earnings of excess of over $136,000. And then you've got married couples filing joint. They will receive their $1,200, well, $2,400 if they're married filing joint. Again, reduces if they, after they get up to $198,000. So I've already gotten my $1,200 payment because I'm receiving a Social Security check every month. So thank you, Mr. Trump. Now, then we also have a paycheck protection program providing small businesses with resources needed to maintain payroll, hire back employees who may have been laid off, and cover applicable for overhead. The Small Business Administration loan is for small businesses with 500 or fewer employees. So that's pretty good, and it's kind of hard to, because the states are controlling part of these payments. They get the money from the federal government, and then it's up to the state to actually distribute the funds to the various companies. First of all, the economic impact payments to taxpayers, for those of us 7 million Americans living outside the United States, we will get that $1,200, but it's not going to come in cash. is going to be a credit against our 2020 income tax return. Okay. For those with the Paycheck Protection Plan, the businesses, that doesn't help any American business owned abroad. That only helps American businesses owned in the United States. Okay. And it provides small businesses with funds to pay up to 8 weeks of payroll costs, including benefits, and funds can also be used to pay interest on mortgages, rent, and utilities. And this goes for the self-employed, those people working from home. Funds are provided in the form of loans that will be fully forgiven when the payroll costs, interest on mortgage, rent, and utilities. At least 75% of the total must be used for payroll. Okay. Loan payments will be deferred for 6 months and no collateral or personal guarantees, and the forgiveness of the loan is based upon the employees maintaining or quickly rehiring employees and maintaining salary levels. So you can't take the money and do with it as you please. It's all tied to payroll. Okay. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, and I think that's about it. Any questions?
Right. Okay. Well, first of all, as I was saying, thank you for the introduction to Jenny and for allowing me to stay here. As you may be aware, Spain is one of the most dignified countries in the world for these COVID infections, and I think that it is served and it was the opportunity to put on the table which have been the causes and which have been the measures introduced by the government, and of course which might be the future amendments that can be introduced for people living here in Spain, and with the particular impact on the wealth of the taxpayers and investors. So please go to the next slide, please. Okay. I would like to introduce the presentation, talking about the Spanish timeline, and as I say here in this presentation, which is the timeline of the infection here in Spain. Everything started in the mid-January or mainly in February, when we have the first cases, the first infections in some islands here, curiously here in Spain, in Canary Islands. There were people coming from, I can remember, from Netherlands, and well, then the infection got spread into Spain due to several demonstrations and sport events, like for example football games and things where people got infected. And after that, there was no measure or no amendment made by the government until the 14th of March, when the state of alarm was declared. And the thing is that from the first months of the year until that declaration of the state of alarm, there was no official measure introduced, no lockdown, no provisions provided to the citizens. And we had the example of Italy really close to here in order to look. But the real thing is that the country, the government here, did nothing in this regard. So we had a real impact here on the 14th of March. We had the declaration of a state of alarm, and of course the lockdown, which was introduced. And the impression or the strong powerful of this state of alarm was lately introduced by the halting of every activity here in Spain, every commercial activity, every bars, the pubs, the discos, everything, restaurants, everything was closed until this 13th of April, when there was a list of some restrictions, some restraints, particularly dedicated to children who were surviving at home during almost 2 months. And then recently, last weekend, to be honest, there was a harder or a new lifting of other restraints, which affected all the rest of individuals here in Spain. And at the end of this period, we've been able to get to the streets, in a limited timeline too. So the thing and the question is, and now what is the future? What can we do now as per this timeline here? First thing, the first step is as of the 4th of May, we've been coming back to the normality, okay? So this is the kickoff of the back to normality process, as I said in the step 0. This process of back into normality is divided into 5 steps, and we are now in the first stage of this, which is step 0. Next step will be the step 1, and would imply the opening of some shops, some hairdressers, this kind of services which can be understood as being essential for the citizens, but on a limited basis. And after that, and if everything goes fine, and this checking is going to be made on a territory by territory basis. So it depends on the particular circumstances of each of the territories, and there could be different measures introduced in each of the territories. If everything goes well by the 25th of May, we can then go to some restaurants or to have a pint on a pub, but of course only with 30% of our friends, because there is a limit, is a restriction for the bars and restaurants to open the tables of the restaurants with a limitation of the 30% of the total population of the restaurant or the bar. So we are going to be reintroducing in a normalized normality, okay? Then in June, by the 11th of June, and I hope everything can go well by that time. And then for the last stage of the process by the end of June, with a new normality, and we will see how this treat us, because of course we've been, everyone in the country, working from home, and we are looking forward to this end of this process. Please go to the next steps. I would like to highlight too, which has been the social impact of this infection in Spain. I think that the figures are massive here, and there's a couple of reasons that I will explain in a couple of minutes too, that can justify these figures here. The number of cases here confirmed in our territory in Spain can represent 220,000, okay? And then I think the most impressive figure is the number of deaths, because it can represent almost 10% of the total of the worldwide deaths in the whole world. So, which have been the reasons in order to reach this situation in our territory? Of course, these figures are backdated to the 1st of May, and well, these are the official figures provided by the Spanish government, but there are some gossips, and well, newspapers are telling that the official figures, of course, are not correct, because there are other people who have not been accounted as infected by the virus. But as I was saying, what's have been the causes, or the causes that have caused this massive infection here in Spain and this situation? I think that the first of it would be the slow and late action from the central governments. Here in Spain, we have a central government and then different states who has their own competencies, and this distribution is mostly good for an administration of citizen rights and tax collections. But the thing is that when there is a huge event like this, that we've never faced something like this, it's difficult to coordinate all the different administrations, because they are from different parties and different ideas. So the curious thing is that in that situation, the central government did take action late, and they centralized the power in the central state, taking the power from the regions. So the real thing is that some regions started first to introduce their own regions in the fields they can do that. For example, taking the children from the school to houses, and suggesting, not obliging, but suggesting the people to work from home. And we had to wait until the 14th of March, as informed before, for the central government to have a real declaration of a state of alarm, to have a real action in that situation, okay? And the thing is that the state of alarm was declared for 15 days, and it has been, it's currently enforced here in Spain. It was extended for 15 days more, and then 15 days more, and now they're asking for some period more. Another cause of the social impact in Spain has been the healthcare services. Everyone here in Spain were sure that our public national health insurance or health services are really good, but the thing is that, there was a collapse in our services, because there was not enough beds for the infected people, and there was too a shortage in the medical supplies and devices. It was really, I was on to have a look at some pictures of the hospitals with the dead people in some rooms. It's disgusting. And this shortage of supplies and equipment, of medical equipment, give the lead to a high rate of infection in the fields of doctors, nurses, and paramedics, which of course is not a good way to tackle the infection. And another important thing is that in Spain, there has been not a real politics of testing COVID-infected people. So this could be another reason to believe that the figures, of course, are not right, because they don't have the real instructions or the real perception of the real infected people here. On top of that, of course, there is another important thing in Spain, which is really serious, which is the economic and wealth impact that the COVID pandemic is causing here. There was a huge impact in the Spanish economy, a massive hit, of course, on the real economy, on the small shops, on small entrepreneurs, small business. And this would lead, in my opinion, a gross and an unemployment rate increase in the coming months. Please, next slide. So after analyzing these social impacts, which have been the social measures introduced in Spain by the administrations. The first of all was the declaration of the state of alarm on the 14th of March. And it was due, as I was saying before, to the uncontrolled spread of the virus. And it forced a national lockdown of everyone. And when I mean a lockdown, it's a real lockdown. We were not able even to go for a ride on a bike or for making some jogging. We were obliged to stay at home and to work from home. And we were only allowed to go to the supermarkets or to the drugstore, or well, no more, or to the hospital in case you are infected. So there was a lockdown initially in business for a period of 15 days, but afterwards it was extended for a subsequent period of 15 days and an additional period of 15 days again. And there was an impressive measure introduced by the government that they were authorized by itself, by a public order, to take over of the private healthcare providers, the private hospitals. They've been used for managing the pandemic in all the way they can. And of course, there were other healthcare system measures like the construction of a special field hospital in IFEMA. IFEMA is a pavilion here, a huge pavilion here in Madrid where expositions are taken. And it was constructed, it was built in 18 hours, so it's a record. And of course, it was used for placing the non-serious infected people, but it helped very much because all the hospitals here in Spain, particularly in Madrid, were really overcrowded. And on top of that, some hotels in Madrid were enabled in order to host some infected people, of course, to those who were less severe cases. There were additional social measures like the travel restrictions and military control of movements. We have militaries on the streets waiting for you to ask, where are you going, or what are you doing on the street if you have to be locked down in your house. There were, of course, another suspension or closure of all traffic operations and a restriction even of the free movement between some territories here in Spain. Talking about the administration activities, they were closed. All the administration here were closed, and well, of course, this includes the museums and any kind of public service was closed. And on top of that, after the first period of 15 days, there was a halting for all the non-essential activities. This means that everyone was at home working or not working. Next slide, please. One of the important things, besides to the social impact, of course, the financial impact here in Spain. Just a brief figures for your information. The EBIT 35, which is our stock market index, had several drops during March and April, but the hardest was the first on 9 March, when it dropped 7.96%, which was the fourth largest single day loss in its history. But well, the worst was on 12th of March when the drop was 14%. It was a really sad day here in Spain because it was a prelude of course, a forecast of the drop of the GDP and these kind of things, and of course, these are not good news for the Spanish economy. Which are real figures in our economy is that for the first quarter, our economy has fallen at 5.2%. This is the biggest drop in nearly a century in Spain. And these are real figures too. We have had a loss of 900,000 people losing their jobs here in Spain, just between these periods of the state of alarm. for the 15 first days of the state of alarm. So we will see how this treats the rest of people working here in Spain. But well, these are not a good sensation for the employment here in Spain. And the forecasts are not really good too for the future, because our bank, our internal bank, the Bank of Spain, give an estimation that our GDP could fall by anywhere between the 6.6 and 13.6 this year. Okay, it will be, of course, the biggest drop in earlier century. And then the International Monetary Fund forecast to an 8% economic contraction in Spain and unemployment rates of 21%. This would meet the figures, the official figures that you are seeing below, provided by the government the last weekend, when they say, this is official figures provided by our government, that the Spanish, that our GDP would decline in 92% and an unemployment rate of 19%. Okay. Please, next slide. And what have been the financial measures introduced in Spain by the government? So, first, there was a financial support package and a stimulus package of more than 200 billion euros, which represents the 20% of the Spanish GDP. The question was on the streets and on the newspapers is, how is Spain going to fund this package? Okay, and it was talking about, there was some gossips and some discussions of the Corona bonds, but there were some discrepancies between the different European Union countries, and well, we're still waiting for what will be the resolution of the suggestions in order to fund this financial package. But there was another kind of support, which was provided particularly by the banks, and these are the loans for entrepreneurs, small and medium enterprises. These are bank loans conceded by the banks, but which are guaranteed by the Spanish authorities, and they must be dedicated to self-employed entrepreneurs, small business affected by the infection. And of course, there are additional measures in order to provide liquidity to the companies, but the real thing is that to date, not many of these affected people have received these measures to guarantee liquidity. These have been difficult in order to transfer the money or to transfer this liquidity from the government, from authorities to the affected people. Going to the private sector or to the private individuals, there was a mortgage moratorium too, which affects the moratorium, the payment of mortgages. Okay, but it was only considered for some people, some debtors who have been considered as economically vulnerable. And this concept is limited only to that people who have lost their job, who have lost 70% of the regular income they receive. So it's difficult to expand this measure to all the people here in Spain. There was another issue, which is a temporary employment suspension law. This means that some small businesses and small companies are allowed to not dismiss, but to suspend the contracts, and the government guarantees the liquidity of the employees by providing some subsidies. And an additional and important measure is the rental agreement reduction or measures. There was introduced a measure or a suggestion stating that there can be different solutions in order to adjust the effect of the COVID infection on the rental agreements. And first measure was the reduction or a deferral of the payments of the rentals. And afterward, there was approved a microloan scheme in order to provide liquidity to the tenants for being able to pay the monthly rentals, and of course, in order to not jeopardize the investments of the landlords. But there was a distinction, and it is referred to the type of landlord you have. And for example, I'm saying here that the small landlords will receive the rent of the properties unless other things agreed with the tenant. So there is a free right to agree between tenant and landlords, and if they agree to do anything different, they can respect their own agreements. But if not, they are the landlords, the small landlords, are entitled to receive the full amount of money. But on the other hand, we have the large owners, which have been considered those who have more than 10 properties rented. And in that situation, they may choose between reducing the rentals or restricting the payments for the next 3 years. Okay? And there was an additional measure introduced by the Spanish government, which is the possibility of redemption of the private pension plans. In Spain, it's not possible to take out the money from the pension schemes, for the private pension schemes, unless that you are retired or you have a disability, or there is an exceptional event, like for example, that you get on a final unemployment. But they have introduced a new possibility to take the money out, but it is only limited, of course, to these kind of people who are the economically vulnerable. And the amount of money you can take out from the pots are limited only to the amount of money that you have not earned during the period of the infection. So it is not a real solution for the real economy. Please go next slide. In which refers to the tax measures, well, I'm not going to highlight every point, but I just would like to highlight that there was a first package of tax measures introduced by the government, which did not imply the suspension of payment of taxes. It would only trigger the suspension of filing the returns. But of course, it did not help to the regular taxpayers or to the small business or entrepreneurs in order to stop the damage of the COVID on their accounts. So there was a lot of criticism here in Spain. There was a lot of critics from the public sectors, from the businessmen, from huge corporations, in order to help the small business, which here in Spain are really, really relevant. And well, as you can see there, you will have the presentation, but there was, the first package was only extensions of filling dates, expiry of terms, these kind of things. But it was only referred to the obligation of submitting the tax returns, not to the obligation of paying the taxes. Okay. Next slide, please. After that criticism, there was a second package of measures introduced by the government, by the central government, which was introduced on the 14th of April and 21st. And as I was saying there, the first package did not extend the deadlines for paying, okay? And the thing is that this new package introduced this possibility for the small businesses. There was an extension due to the extension of the state of alarm. There was an extension until 13th of May of all the previous reference made to 13th of April. And of course, which is more important, the second bullet there, then extension until 20 May too, of the filing and payment deadlines, okay? It was limited, as I was saying there, to a particular parts of the taxpayers, which are those regulated by the volume of business not exceeding the 600,000 euros. And there was, well, different extensions to all the obligations and to the possibility of communicating with the authorities throughout the expiry of train certificates. There was a new exemption, for example, for mortgages who are now being renegotiated due to the conditions of the COVID and these kind of things. I'm saying this below in the autonomous territories and local tax measures, that it's important, as I mentioned before, that in Spain, the autonomous territories and the regions and the local administrations are entitled to approve their own measures in certain situations and certain taxes. And the thing is that they take action to, they have taken the action before in which refers to tax amendments than the central states in the taxes that they are entitled to do that. Next slide, please. Now I would like to highlight which is the main consequence or the main consequences here in Spain of the COVID, which will be affecting, of course, the real estate markets and the potential tax measures in order to fund the packages, the financial packages that have been approved. The first one is the real estate markets. Well, of course, during the state of alarm and today, the market is frozen. There was a freezing of all the transactions due to the lockdown, despite the notaries are open, but only for really, really urgent transactions. There was an estimation of different professional associations and professional colleges that the Spanish market, the Spanish real estate market, will fall for 10% or more or less. So there is another curious thing, that is a new interest in countries and properties in order to have a good lockdown, different to the flats in the city centers. And the expert says that the market will be recovered in 2 years, for 2022. So we are seeing here a headline from the El País newspaper, where it says that house prices in parts of Spain have seen significant declines, although pre-sales are occurring. These few sales, of course, are being taking part in the main cities in Madrid, Barcelona, and really, really specific properties. This is not a general trend. And in which refers to the potential tax measures to be introduced, this is the the huge effect that we're going to face here in Spain. The potential tax measures to get introduced, which will have an impact on every taxpayer here, and particularly too on those non-residents who has assets here. And it was said that some ministries here in Spain have published their opinions and their comments, stating that there will be a new Google tax, which is a 2% tax on the digital income obtained by tech multinationals here in Spain. There was an additional 0.2% financial transaction tax, which will be imposed on all the acquisitions of Spanish producers. And then there will be another type of measures to get introduced in the personal income tax and wealth tax affecting individuals, and of course on the corporations, which, well, in my opinion, will not be helping so much for the recovery of our economy. And as you can see there was a 4% additional tax envisaged for the individuals, whether for savings or for the general income, employment income. And there will be an increase too in the wealth tax. Spain is one of the, I guess, 3 countries in the world, in the developed world, who have wealth tax. And now it envisages a new increase. So let's see what happens with the rich people living in Spain, because this can be really significant in order to fund the economic packages that the government is stating. And there will be an additional impact on corporate income tax, establishing a minimum tax payable of 15% and a 15% tax on dividend distributions made as per Parents Subsidy Directive. And well, there will be another additional measures, but of course today they have not been released here. And we will look forward to receiving the news from the government and of course from the regional governments too, in order to assess the effects of the measures in the Spanish people. This next slide. Just for ending my presentation, I would like to introduce and highlight the comments here in this slide, because it's the average cost for a 30-year-old inheriting assets for the value of 800,000 euros in Spain. And as you can see, it depends on several factors, but the main factor determining the tax due here in Spain, inheritance tax due, is their autonomous territory, the region where the deceased was living. And you can see the differences, okay? You can see that there is a huge difference between some territories and another. And this will have an impact on all the COVID dead people, because, well, there was some suggestions from some political parties and political forces trying to establish a general exemption for those people inheriting assets by virtue of a death caused by the COVID. To date, there was no resolution, no comment from the governments in this regard, and they are not envisaged to be done too. But this is just for you to be aware of the huge differences of being in one part of Spain or another when talking about taxes. Next slide, please. And well, I usually introduce this slide in my presentations because it's really illustrative for people living in Spain or trying to relocate here, because they are reflected which are the main assets of the families in Spain, the business assets, the real estate, the financial, other lucrative or leisure assets, like for example the yachts. And I usually put these 3 colors, the green, yellow, red, in order to say or to highlight which are the assets which are tax benefited or which have a really tax effective tax treatment here in Spain, in order to make amendments in the tax planning or the wealth planning of the clients. And now, by virtue of the COVID, I think that the clients have a really good opportunity in order to review the tax planning, because I have lots of calls from clients telling me, okay, now I've been aware that everything can change in a minute here, and what the month before was a normal situation means that today I cannot go to the street and I can die even in my home. So without nothing done, the taxes can be massive here in Spain. So this is just an encouragement for people to foster the wealth planning and to review it annually, because it's really important to do that. Okay, and that's all. Thank you.
Javier, thank you very much. Was really enlightening. Was really interesting.
Thank you.
Orally announced certain measures that will be introduced into Russian tax law. Precisely that would aim just to help the Russian budget and would aim just to help some certain Russian taxpayers within these COVID times. But essentially, if we look at all those measures that have been introduced and have been enacted, so I would say that fairly professionally that these measures are quite effective. So the measures, I would just split the measures on a domestic level, on an international level. And when speaking on the domestic measures, they aim just to support certain areas and certain areas of business that have been affected in the most way. So in particular, if we state about the measures which have been introduced, this kind of like the postponement with the filing of tax returns, the postponing of payments for the social security payments, delay within the time for the payments of this certain taxes. But for that, you have to just to meet certain criteria to be from the particular area. And what's more curious and what's more interesting, that also the tax return the deadline has been also extended. But if we just try to critically look at the measures and think whether they're fair enough and all of them are indeed effective, I would say that rather no. Just to give you one example. For example, if you would like just to file the claim just and to apply the postponed payment for the certain tax, if you're a corporate taxpayer, then you at the same time have to file the tax return prior to the deadline of payment of taxes. So what was the reason in particular for introducing such a measure as late filing of a tax return, whether the other measures had not been introduced automatically? What's more interesting, I think, for the private clients and for private investors, from Russian perspective, is the postponement for the filing of tax return, provided that a lot of the clients are also always late comers and always collect all the documents required for the tax return as attachment to tax return and as a last minute option. So you could imagine what had happened when all the banks, when all the service providers and domestic professionals just are not able to provide all the documents. In particular, as you know, the Russian deofficialization matters. So there will be the last year when we'll be able just to file the application for tax exempt liquidation. Just to collect all the documents, you have just to realize that this is kind of this measure was indeed effective. So just going further towards the international measures. Yes, thank you, Evgeny. I have just precisely, this will be one slide. So precisely, the president announced that when you're dealing with the payments to offshore, so the Russian corporate taxpayers will have to withhold 15% when dealing with dividends and with the interest. But if we look at the precisely case when we try to analyze what president meant initially, because this letter that you see is a result of the announcement by the president. So you will just understand that, well, Russia already has the 15% withholding tax when dealing with the payment to the country having no double tax treaty. At the same time, the 20% rate also applies. So a lot of professionals and a lot of the clients, just figured out and tried to forecast what will effectively be the measure, how effectively this mechanism will work. And quite common question from our clients was, well, Nikolai, do we understand correctly then when transferring the money abroad from our private account will also be subject to certain tax? So effectively, no. And if we look precisely of what resulted after president's announcement, we will see that, so this is kind of the letter which appeared then. So the Ministry of Finance introduced the mechanism of the protocol, which would adjust two articles. The articles related to dividends and articles related to interest. So precisely, as you know, the Cyprus provides for the withholding tax at the rate for 5% when certain investment criteria is met, and whereas for the other cases, let's say 10%. This was by default. This is how it worked before. But nowadays, what the Russian promoted that, okay, we are fed up with this status quo and how the double tax really worked before, and we introduced the 15% interest rate. So essentially, the same letter has been also delivered towards the officials of Malta and of the Luxembourg. So we may assume that that these measures will be also introduced towards these countries. Effectively, if we look at these measures, they will work in 2021, so next year, when we'll have the deal with the Russian withholding tax, because as you know, the individuals are not withholding agents in Russia, whereas the corporate taxpayers are withholding agents, and they must withhold tax the next day after after the payment of the tax. So effectively, those measures will work next year. Now, if we go back at the context of the adoption of those measures and the context of the president announcement, are these measures sufficient and aimed to help within the particular hard times, the COVID times within nowadays? I would rather say no. I would say that this is kind of long playing game with the fighting of international tax avoidance. So I think that was the message behind all of that. Ministry of Finance also announced that before 25th of December of this year, it will evaluate the other jurisdictions and other countries which will also participate within this process, so against which also Ministry of Finance will forward and apply essentially the same mechanism. As far as we know, Cyprus had not officially responded yet. There was no kind of equivalent response to this Ministry of Finance letter. Essentially, we're not aware about the responses from the Malta and from Luxembourg. The Cyprus, I believe, was the first one because, well, historically, Cyprus was the jurisdiction for the Russian business managers to hold the assets and to apply. Again, I think we may just also step by backside. Yes, the Cyprus was the first one because it's historically been the jurisdiction for holding the Russian assets. And fairly enough, before 2010, I remember the cases when the tax authority never claimed or almost never claimed the application of the withholding tax. But as you know, Russia recently adopted certain measures into Russian tax law, which affected into certain application of the Russian beneficial ownership rules. So effectively, they have been always existed within the double tax treaties applied by Russia, but they were dormant, I would say that. So additionally, why I believe the Cyprus was the first one who was the victim against by Ministry of Finance, since one of the first investor, well, let's say the largest investors into Russian economy, 34% of investments came through Cyprus within the period of 2010 and 2019. This is official data from the central bank. The second place, if we look who was also the investor, was also the Switzerland. And even though the Swiss double tax treaty provides for 15% interest rate, so I believe this is why I believe the Switzerland should not be the next victim or next obvious victim. Well, I think Russia decided also just why this approach has been implemented. Just by default will be, let's say, the top rate of 15%. I think Russia was fed up also with all these unstoppable investigations, and I'm also active within the tax audits concerning the beneficial ownership rules application, and we also have cases where we had actually cases, and we have now on cases where the tax period for 2015 was also under the scrutiny. So that was actually, I think, kind of a gesture where the government showed, okay, we're fed up with all of that, and what we will do the next year, we'll apply 15% rate. We do have the concept of the beneficial ownership rules here in Russia for tax purposes, which is not essentially the same as for anti-money laundering purposes. The concept stands and the concept applies as additional measure for preventing of the tax abuse when applying double tax treaties. So, and it works quite effectively. So the Russian tax authorities dig in too deep into the history, into the work of the foreign companies, the recipient of dividends, whereas they truly dig too deep. And from our experience, there are always some cases and the possibilities just to claim against those measures. And most of you already know that there are more than, say, 30 cases, publicly available cases on the beneficial ownership application rules. So this is also the question why, I mean, provided that we have such a measure, such an instrument as the beneficial ownership rules, why is we still using this instrument as the protocol that we see? Again, I still believe that this is kind of the message from the government. Okay, we're fed up with this. I believe, Evgeny, I think next slide, we may also just step to the next slide. I believe the next victims might obviously appear to be Netherlands and Ireland and Singapore. Why I believe those countries will be, let's say, the next victims? Because the Netherlands also is well known as the holding company and quite kind of large investor. In addition, if we look at the report Tax Justice International, which has been published in the beginning of April, the European Union, those jurisdictions among the Cyprus, among Luxembourg and Malta, have been named as the jurisdictions which have been used for the tax dodging. Singapore, this is also very well-known jurisdiction for Russian tax planning purposes, and we also supported a lot of tax audits having the Singapore companies on the top. I do not believe that the Hong Kong should be also the next victim, because the Hong Kong have quite complicated rules just to get the tax residence certificate. So before you get the tax residence certificate, the tax authority of the Hong Kong, they actually initiate the tax audit as to whether the recipient and whether the Hong Kong company itself is a beneficial owner and owner of the income source from abroad. So it's quite complicated tax audit in this regard. So this is why I believe that Hong Kong will not be the next victim. But these top three, I will believe that will be, let's say, the next victim for us. Why dividends and why interest? Why other measures and why other types of income have not been affected? Because historically, the receipt of dividends, the receipt of interest, has been one of the instruments according to which the foreign investors have been gaining the certain benefits from Russia, and obviously benefiting from the double tax treaty. If we're talking about the private individuals who are investing in, whether they will be affected by the introduced measures, at a certain extent, yes, but there is also a backside of the coin, because there is also a possibility just to apply this so-called look-through approach to taxation, when this is kind of mechanism introduced into Russian law, according to which all the intermediary entities are disregarded, and you just treat and you tax the structure as, let's say, the individual was direct holder within the Russian entity in particular. So this will be, I guess, I'm more than sure that this is also already applied by Russian tax authorities. This mechanism is positively met. So I think still using the foreign entity, let's say Cyprus entity, I wouldn't say that, let's say this is kind of the dawn of Cyprus. Yes, I wouldn't say that this is kind of the end of the Cyprus. Cyprus still will be used for you having the SPV structures, but obviously this is not the case anymore for the tax purposes. Now, what will be additional? What will happen if, let's say, the Cyprus will not take the position, will not agree to sign this protocol? So the measure will be as follows. The Russian will merely denounce the agreement itself with the double tax treaty. Will that be of negative character? I would rather say yes, because it will not serve for the purposes for which double tax treaties will serve, obviously, for excluding the cases when we are dealing with double taxation, the crediting of tax. There are other types of income which are also benefiting from the double tax treaties, which are not dividends and interest, obviously. When dealing with individuals, no tiebreaker rules will apply, and both Russia and foreign country will treat the individual as might treat as the Russian source. Just for example, just for the sake of example, we had a client from Belarusia, which, and according to domestic rules, he deemed to be, let's say, domestic resident, because according to the local rules for counting the days, he was, let's say, 200 days spending in Belarusia, whereas according to Russian rules, he spent, let's say, 190 days. So effectively, almost 400 days he spent somewhere, whereas this is fairly more than a year. But if we will just look at the case, if the agreement will be denounced, there might be always the cases when the individual is still the same time as a resident in Russia and in a foreign country. So in addition to that, Russian tax law does not provide, the domestic tax law does not provide for the possibility to credit foreign taxes unless it is provided by the double tax treaty. So this is also a negative measure which will be applied. Currently, there are negotiations about implementing, making and applying the same tax rate for residents and for non-residents. It should be worth mentioning that for certain types of income, non-resident individuals are subject to increased tax rate, which is 30%, almost 3 times more than for opposing to the local one. Now, if we just imagine that this rule will be implemented into Russian law, so both having the residents here in, if we look at the taxation of residents for dividends, for example, and foreigners, for example, it will be effectively the same one. But we'll have to also look as to whether the foreign country also allows you to credit the foreign tax. For example, this is possible within the UK, whereas for the rest of the world, it has to be analyzed thoroughly. Of course, countries may counterclaim such initiative, but fairly will they do so? I believe that not. I believe that not, because otherwise it will undermine the whole mechanism and the other benefits provided by the double tax treaty. So just summing up of where we are and where we're going. So this is a kind of new reality, I would say so. This is an unprecedented move by an action by Russian tax authorities and by Russian Ministry of Finance precisely. So will that affect corporate taxation? Certainly will. So it will mean essentially that just maybe some of the jurisdictions used within the international holding corporate when dealing with the corporate taxpayers will have to be relocated to other countries if let's say in the most negative scenario, the double tax treaty relevant will be denounced, or just to maybe relocate within the EU. So it is possible by, for example, redomiciliation mechanism or through merge in, but a lot of other tax matters will have to be analyzed thoroughly, or maybe just you have to simplify the structure. Will the proposed measures affect private investors investing into Russia? I would fairly say that rather not, because there is also a backdoor for using the so-called look-through approach to taxation, and we also look positive into decreasing of the withholding tax rate for non-residents. So once again, if we look at the introduced measures, will we say that these was to relax certain tax aspects of the Russian taxation? I would say no. Were they adopted within the context of strengthening the rules of international taxation? I would rather say yes. So this is kind of a presidential move. I'm not aware yet whether other countries have adopted any such measures, but I think this kind of new reality, and this is what foreign investors will have to analyze, and also the Russian investors have to analyze whether their structures are positive. But still, as I said, just not to finish on the negative side, there is always a backdoors. There's also a possibility just to apply the proper level of taxation. So should you have any colleagues, should you have any further questions, again, my contacts will be already, I guess, circulated amongst the participants, amongst all the participants, and just stay safe, and should you have any questions, I'm at your disposal.
Thank you very much, Nikolai. Thank you. I'm passing word now to Alexander Zakharov.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I would like to start with a very, very famous thing. In this world, nothing can be said to be certain except death and taxes. And all we know that nobody, I mean, not any state has introduced to anything just speaking about what we should think of here in Russia is that we are in a very interesting state. We do not have a state of emergency here. We do not have state of kind of, let's say, urgent situation. All we have here is a state of preparatory for urgency. Well, what is it? State of preparatory for emergency. Well, we do have now non-working days. It means kind of holidays. Holidays for the virus. What should be next, we do not know. But the state is up to the end of our public holidays till 11th of May. Well, I do completely agree with Nikolai that the future is very, very unpredictable here in Russia, not only in respect of our tax implications, but also for the economy and also for our international perspectives. As just a moment, I have some problem with my broadcasting. Evgeny, is it okay now?
It's better. Yes, it got better.
Okay. Well, the issue is that the country was completely closed from the 14th of April, I believe, and from March 30th, everybody entering the state from the European countries, not only from China, was put under obligation to have 14 days quarantine. We don't know when these all restrictions would be lifted or released. Actually, we are under obligation to have kind of electronic pass to commute to the region, also to go to work. Well, usually people above the age of 65-year-olds, they are under obligation to stay at home, and they are not even entitled to visit, as far as I remember, shops and anything. Everything is closed, but the shops for the first needs and the food, of course. Well, actually, we do not know what would be announced on the 6th of May by the Russian presidents in regarding lifting up the restrictions here in Russia. If we discuss the legal grounds for these restrictive measures, all we now have in practice is just kind of executive order, but not the president of the Russia, but the mayor of Moscow. Very interesting to know, yeah, how one mayor could set up restrictions, and how all this stuff could be run within Russia. Actually, the only point which could be interesting for high net worth individuals is how could they commute to the European nations. Well, nobody knows when all these restrictions within the European Union, and also when all the frontiers would be open for the regular commercial airlines. We also, when our commercial airlines would start again regarding Europe, while also for the United Kingdom and for the United States. As far as I remember, several days ago, the only airline was that was chartered by the government of the United States. Well, effectively made its voyage to the state of New York. Well, but the thing I would like to mention is that we have many high net wealth individuals who at the moment considering should they disclose themselves as the tax residents of Russia here in Russia, or could they rely on their tax residency in the United Kingdom or any other foreign states? Well, we don't know, well, the actual answer is that in Russia we have not only Russian tax residence criteria, but we, as you might know, we also have currency exchange control. That means every person with the Russian citizenship is a currency resident here in Russia, and we all do have specific obligations to disclose all our foreign accounts. Well, quite similar requirements we know people have in the United States regarding foreign bank accounting reports. Well, but unlike in the United States, here in Russia, we have very restrictive fines, which could run up to 75%, and we could, let's say, feel the severe fine and severe legal consequences regarding non-disclosed and non-compliance regarding currency. OECD has issued recommendations for the developed countries that people who locked in the foreign states, that they could rely on their absence in the state of their tax residency, by the mean that they were locked in the foreign state for this particular virus reason. And they could rely on the situation that they do not have to change their tax residence, and these circumstances will not affect their tax residence. Unfortunately, here in Russia, we have our specific reality, and as Nikolai mentioned, we could encounter with many, I wouldn't say illegal requirements, but we could say kind of efforts by the Russian tax authority to tie the prospective Russian residents, I mean, in the context, within the context, as they could be deemed as Russian tax residents. Since we have very simple criteria here in Russia, you just need to spend at least 183 days within the calendar year, and it could be a reason why you could be asked for tax compliance and also for disclosure of your offshore or foreign accounts and foreign assets. All these things give us a new understanding that we should be more and more serious about the future implications of all these COVID effects. I mean, within the tax perspective and with your restrictions for future mobility. Well, OECD, as far as we remember, mentioned that the human mobility, individuals' mobility, was the main challenge to tackle with tax frauds and tax evasion. At the moment, the COVID-19 situation gives our governments very strong arguments in the perspective area, how to cope with people, with individuals, just how to make them accountable for their tax obligations, without doing anything, or just we should know that at the moment only person with a second citizenship or with a permanent residence within a foreign state could be able to enter the foreign state, and only by this thing, with such a person could, let's say, avoid any problem with this with its tax residence perspective. I mean, for people here in Russia, if you do not have at the current moment, if you do not have second citizenship or any kind of residence permit for foreign state, you could not even leave the country. I mean, we are under a great pressure at the moment, and we do not know when all this kind of restriction would be released, at the end of this year or maybe next year. As we could see in Europe, the situation is more predictable, because I believe even in the states of Spain or Italy, we see that current restrictions are released, and we do hope that in Russia we will see maybe such a relaxation. Sorry for this word. Well, maybe in a month or in a two. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexander. Darlene, you have a question?
Can I say something? No, I just have a comment, because both Alexander and Nikolai talked a lot about the income tax that is, the tax law. And to be honest with you, the tax acts that the U.S. have passed have been more to generate and put money in taxpayers' pockets rather than collecting, collecting and very unusual. I know it's very unusual for the U.S. government, but they've been concentrating on printing money, and handing it out. That's what they're concentrating on right now. I don't know that they know how they're going to pay for this. Maybe it's going to be the what did I say, 2 trillion $1 coins that are going to be minted. I don't know, where they're going to come up with the 3 trillion worth of cash that they're handing out to everybody. But the tax laws have not really looked at raising revenue. Okay, the changes. It's all about giving relief and keeping hands in individuals' pockets rather than collecting. Okay, one of the things that they have said is that and there's a lot of foreign nationals in the United States who were stuck there during the lockdown and the freeze out of international flights and stuff. And they realize that these people are not necessarily considered to be tax residents or shouldn't be considered to be U.S. tax residents. And under the treaties, because of the number of days, and that's how tax residency is figured in the United States, is the number of days physically present in the United States. They're going to, they've talked about giving an extra 90 days, potentially more, who knows, depends on how long this freeze out is and how difficult it is, but they are going to lax those rules with regards to the number of days spent in the United States as far as tax residency is concerned. If you were there if you were physically stuck in the United States because of, the pandemic, coronavirus. So it's interesting to see how other governments are reacting. Okay, and I don't know. I don't know. I guess the U.S. just feels they can print money until the cows come home. I don't know. I mean, but they haven't. None of these tax law changes have is about. None of it is about generating revenues. What they are saying is, if they do give a break and you're not paying your interest, you're not going to get a deduction for interest that is paid late, or so they're limiting deductions. So that might be a little bit of a revenue raiser, but it's interesting. It's interesting. There's a lot of unanswered questions and a lot of issues, and they're slow to make changes right now. And the IRS has not come out with interpretations of the various pieces of legislation that have been enacted. So we'll see.
You know what happens to Russia? Somebody here tries to milk the bony or skinny cow instead of providing the feeding stuff. It seems like, because I believe that in such an environment, what would effectively work really for is providing provision of effective measures, some kind of maybe holidays, tax holidays, effective, that would provide to all of them, and just maybe to disregard for someone or to relax at a certain extent the measures would have been for the cross-border matters. But as you see, as I have provided, if you look at the details and look at in particular details, and I talk a lot with the businessmen here, with our clients as well, they do not see that kind of these measures are effectively working. So what really happens is that they just consider everything as a cost at the moment. So they're not tending just to apply for these measures, because even if you would like to apply, there are a lot of administrative things to do and things to be done. So yeah.
I think that one thing that they have done is they have relaxed payments of Social Security, and they went into the mortgage companies and the banks and said, listen, do not foreclose on houses, end of story. You got to give people a minimum of a year to get caught up on their mortgage payments and on rent. I mean, if you are a landlord right now, okay, I'm a landlord. I do have a property in Chicago that is being rented out, and my renters are paying, thank goodness. But I couldn't kick them out if I wanted to, and that's more. It's a suggestion at the federal level, so it's up to the states to make their decision whether or not they want to implement that suggestion or not. And Illinois is implementing that suggestion, and quite a few other states are implementing that suggestion. So it's interesting to see what is going on and how each of the states are reacting. And I mean, it's all out war between the president, a lot of these governors, because he wants to open up the entire United States, and a lot of the governors are saying, no way, Jose, it's not going to happen in our state. So you'll see a lot of back and forth on CNN and Mr. Trump's Twitter.
we have a question from Michael Haji Hanas. Hello, Michael. And the question is, I would like to ask two questions to all four speakers. Which potential tax measure, in your opinion, can be the most effective and fair one without damaging and disturbing, to a great extent, the balance of your domestic economy? So I think we'll do first question and the second one later. So who will start? Fair tax without disturbing the sterling economy.
I would say, you know what, fairly, maybe a couple of measures. Effective tax holidays from the Russian perspective, that would definitely work. And you know, simplified procedures for applying for this tax holidays. I mean, the rest administrative things. I mean, irrespective of the industry, or maybe just also in addition to that, even if this not be provided, so maybe just to substantially extend the scope of the industry that were affected, and just to simplify the possibility just to apply the tax holidays, because you know this is not the proper time just to tax a lot. In addition to that, well, maybe just think about the VAT, because all the measures which were introduced the Russian law as a tax measure, they're not working for the VAT measures. So, but the VAT is kind of substantial tax. Maybe at least that will give the possibility for the taxpayers just to accumulate some funds and just to maybe postpone the payment of the VAT. Okay, just treat and pay the tax, pay the VAT, but pay it later on. So we're not talking about the possibility of non-payment of taxes. Well, that will be the holiday, the festival, if we are not paying the taxes at all. But let us be fair enough. So let's talk about the fair possibility and easy, simple ways just for the tax holidays here in Russia.
I think I would have to agree on the U.S. side. I think one measure that the U.S. government would be very successful with, and which I think they're already trying to do, is number one, Social Security tax. They're giving companies a year to pay. You know, so the Social Security, because it's part of payroll, right? And in the United States, you have to pay it on a monthly basis. So you always pay the previous month, you know, the Social Security. So it kind of gives a bit of a break to the corporate entities. It doesn't affect the individual because they withhold tax from him anyway, you know, and so it gives the companies the cash flow to continue to employ, you know. Robbing Peter to pay Paul type thing. I think as far as the U.S. is concerned, I think they're already implementing certain measures for small businesses and for major businesses to, I mean, okay, 2019, if it was a bumper crop year and you're paying huge tax liability this year for what you incurred last year, you know, a bit of a break, you know, on your bottom line tax liability. I mean, they have given us extension, 90-day extension to file returns, individual, corporate, partnership, trust, estate, all returns they've extended to file for 90 days, and extending or alleviating the interest on those late payments and late filed returns. Well, there's not going to be any late penalties or underpayment penalties. It'll be just interest on the tax due. And if they alleviate that, that will help. But I think those kind of measures where the government is not paying out the cash, you know, I mean, at the end of the day, I got my $1,200, okay? It's already gone, you know, it's already gone. Didn't sit in my pocket very long. So I think the one-time payments are a good political move, but I don't know that it's it's a short-term solution. It's not a long-term solution. Okay. For a lot of people, it'll help them with groceries for a month, maybe a month and a half. So let's see. There's a lot of other measures that need to happen out there.
Okay, from Spain, I would say that well, we'll have to take into account with our background in taxes. First, we have one of the highest rates in VAT within the European Union, and I think there's no way on that way in order to increase VAT. But well, maybe I would say that suggesting to establish a tax on maybe on tourism, on visitors from abroad, because we have a really huge amount of people coming to Spain, not today due to the restriction measures, but of course, increasing the tax pressure too, not on investments made from abroad, but on visitors, I think that it could help. Of course, this is only a one-shot tax, but I would say that tax pressure in Spain for entrepreneurs and individuals is really high enough in order to increase it, and more even today with the figures and the problems, the financial problems that small businesses and businessmen here are having. And of course, I will never support an increase in the wealth tax, because I say that it's a double taxation on something that have been paying taxes before. But there is another thing in Spain, which is the distribution of competencies of taxes. I mentioned in my presentation that there is the possibility that the autonomous regions establish their own taxes or their own tax rates. And for example, in the slide regarding the inheritance of this guy, the example, you've seen that there are huge difference between different territories. Maybe it could be better to have a harmonized tax rate all over the country in order to not having these discrepancies between the different territories, and in order to increase the taxation for the overall state. That would be my recommendation.
Thank you, Javier. Alexander, wanna add something?
Well, it's quite difficult just to, let's say, to figure out what measure would be fair, or what measure could be, let's say, justified by the state of emergency, or well, okay, anything like that. But as a matter of fact, I mean that taxes, tax is often not fair enough. Just because, as we see from the United States practice, not only, well, I mentioned the United States just because, well, it is the #1 economy in the world, and I would suggest that the most fair tax system, of course, I see that many things play well in the United States. Well, as a matter of fact, of course, there are many disadvantages. Well, as also we do have in our European taxation system, tax systems. But what could be offered by the government? Well, all we see from their post by the United States president that China should be blamed for this virus, and well, that Chinese the Chinese enterprises should pay, or the China should pay for this crisis. But my understanding that to set up a fair tax, we should analyze the structure of income moment. Of course, tax holidays is good way just to treat this crisis, treat the people who suffered from this crisis. But it's very difficult, just to differentiate the real people suffered from the coronavirus and the people who benefited effectively. I mean, there are many businesses, especially in China, which succeeded or made fantastic income. I mean, in the sphere of this medical equipment and so on and so forth. But of course, if we talk about the stuff like taxing wealth, it's a very complicated issue, just because all these things that could be set up here now at the moment to cope with the consequences of the coronavirus crisis could not I mean, the governments they would not like to release or lift up or seize all these measures, because they like it. They like it very much. Just they like the transparency. They like the way of control the people, the businesses. I think we are all on the verge of a new reality we should be ready to fight with. it's not a kind of a revolutionary manifest, but I mean, we should be able just to be able to protect our future obligations. I mean, we should pay the money we owe our government, not more, not less. And we should be protected by the laws, and not by the, let's say, kind of executive orders, or we shouldn't be affected by all these kind of the laws, not the executive ways of yeah, so orders kind of, let's say, the use practice, but I mean not only use practice, but the practice in any state of Europe, because we all know that it's very easy just to rely on a state of emergency and do anything you would like to just gain your particular aims you could not get in the, let's say, peaceful time.
Mm-hmm. Which is why I think when Trump was faced with the problems between New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, because there's so many commuters and people going in and out and in and out, and New Jersey wanted to close their doors, and Connecticut did close their doors, and New York was on the verge of closing their doors, and he did not force it. Okay. He said he implemented travel restrictions, and he left it up to the governors to actually manage the situation. So I think he's been very, and I'm really not a Trump fan, but this has been a very difficult situation for him or any government to handle. Yeah. And I think by not dictating policy, but allowing the states to continue to monitor and manage their people and support them, I think that's been a smart move on his part. He might not agree with what they're doing or what they're saying. He makes it very clear, but at least he hasn't taken any executive orders to which he has the power to do. Okay, so that's good.
There was a second part of Michael's question, which was or can be the most effective technological tool that was utilized during the last couple of months so as to prevent the spread of pandemic, and in addition help businesses to survive. But I don't think any of the governments got an answer to this. So Michael, as soon as there is something, we will let you know. Thank you. And there is a question from Olga to Javier. Why did Spanish government applied such a strict measures to tourism sector and close country for external tourism instead of applying soft restrictions? Is it allowed for property owners having foreign citizenship to enter the country? When is a total recovery of tourism sector expected?
Well, thank you, Olga, for your question. Regarding your first question, I think that the reason in order to close everything here in Spain, because that was essentially that there was no control on the infection, no control on the measures. They did know anything about the infection, and of course for us inside the country as Spanish citizens have been really amazing to be forced to stay at home during such a long time without any notice before, because just a week before the state of alarm, the official message from the government was that, well, there was like a common flu. I was, just for your information, I was in Vienna in a conference with other lawyers, the STEP Europe conference, and I was meeting there with some people from Italy, from the north part of Italy, Milano, and well, they were commuting from London to Milan, and they advised me of the situation of how Italy was suffering the infection. When I came back to Spain, to Madrid, I was speaking to some friends and about the possibilities of having in the same or getting in the same place that Italy was in that time. And the real thing is that we've been 1 week after Italy on all the procedures. And the reason in order to close everything in such a severe way from the Spanish tax authorities is that, in my opinion, that they don't have any idea on how to manage this, because they didn't even know which can be the potential number of infection, because the figures were living from one way to the other, stating that first this will be 3 or 4 cases in the country, and now we have more than 25,000 people dead. And that's the thing, that they weren't aware of how deep this could be going. This is the reason for the first thing. And regarding your second question, I would say that I'm sorry to inform that it's not possible for foreign people coming to Spain, because there was a huge pressure from German people trying to move from Germany to Ibiza, in Balearic Islands. There's a strong community there in Balearic Islands from German people. And they were even negotiating or trying to negotiate with the Spanish government in order to be able to move from Germany to here to stay in the lockdown, but here in Spain in their houses, in the country houses, on the beach houses. And they weren't allowed, of course, because it would be a real discrepancy or controversy against the free movement right that is allowed to all the citizens here in Spain and the European Union. And that's the reason. I wouldn't say that tourism could be recovered in Spain until next year at least. So I would say that, for example, hotels, I have some clients who own hotels here in Madrid and in the coast, and having a chat with them, they say that, or they believe that it is not worth to open the hotels during this summer in Spain. So they are thinking of remaining closed, and because the running cost of starting the business again in July or in August, are not well enough to take the risk of having an infection in your hotel and having a perception outside that you are the responsible for reactivating the pandemic. So I would say that the normal tourism here in Spain could be reactivated next year, because even for the Spanish citizens who are currently here, like my case, I'm afraid we won't be able to move to the coast at least until mid-August or first weeks of August. Let's say.
Okay.
Thank you, Javier. And I mean, we don't really have many questions, but perhaps you'd like to add something. There is a question. I see now. Okay. Thank you, Javier, from Olga.
Okay. Of course, I remain at your disposal in case you require any further clarifications. You will have my personal details, so just feel free to give me a call, to send me an email, and we'll be more than pleased. Thank you.
Maybe perhaps as a so to say last statement for 1-2 minutes. What's your idea of impact on the wealth, on the private wealth of the people in the country by this economic situation?
Okay, I'll go first. First of all, I think, the markets are down, real estate is down. I would hate to have a lot of commercial real estate at this stage, because I think the way business is being done or will be done in the future is going to change tremendously. There's no way I'm going to sit on a train for a 3-hour ride down to between Zurich and Geneva to have a couple of meetings when I can just do them from my desk, without spending the 3 hours there and 3 hours back. So I'm not going to be traveling nearly as much, at least in my business. Okay, so we're a service business. We do U.S. tax. We're a firm of U.S. tax accountants and lawyers. So I can do business meetings from Spain, from all of the clients that I have around the globe. Zoom is brilliant. I'm investing in Zoom. That's a good investment as far as I'm concerned. But also, our lease is up at the end of the year here in this office space. And to be honest with you, I think my staff are doing a great job at working at home. I don't see, in fact, I'm ready to just give them, say, listen, guys, as long as you come in at least 2 days a week, I'm a happy camper. Let's agree the 2 days everybody's going to be here. Let's do whatever needs to be done. And as far as working from home, if you're productive and we can get just as much work done from home, why travel an hour and a half, you know, and commute in and another hour and a half back every day? You know, it's nuts. So how business is done, the way business is done, how it's transacted is changing, you know, and I agree with you, Alexander, with your comment that you made on that point. Exactly. I think there's major changes as far as that stuff is concerned. I don't know. You know what? I forgot the question you asked me. I started rambling. What was the question? Again?
The impact on wealth. Do you think? Well, do you think people will there'll be major expropriations by the governments? Will be
no, hell no. No. I think there's opportunities, and I think people are going to be. Face it. Okay, I haven't been able to go anywhere for the last 2 months. My entire credit card bill is totally paid off. Okay, I'm going to be putting that money in the stock market. You know, when I think it's hit the bottom, I'm going in. You know, I think, I don't know. I think, yes, there's going to be winners and there's going to be losers. And I think you're going to, how people, they're going to have to restructure, you know, okay, what kind of a job can I do now? You know, your restaurants, a lot of restaurants have stayed open here in Switzerland because they are now doing nothing but delivering, you know, delivering their food. And so they don't have the overhead of what they're making money. At least they're covering their costs, you know, by delivering food. And so how business is done is changing. It's on many levels. So I don't know. I think, yes, there's a huge economic downturn and the number of unemployment is going to be huge. And I think that's probably why the U.S. is giving so many breaks to small businesses. Any small business with under 500 employees, they're giving huge breaks to. You know, you don't have to pay this Social Security tax or the withholding tax for a year. That's big. That's big. You know, so and they're paying you, you know, X% per employee. They're doing their damnedest to keep people off the unemployment lines. I don't know how successful they'll be.
Okay. Javier?
Yes, I completely agree with Darlene, and I think that the world is changing and has changed now with this kind of things, and the future starts now, and there will be lots of opportunities. But I think that the first step would be hard in order to tackle it, because at least I'm talking from my Spanish perspective and my local perspective. Spain is a country which obtains lots of income from tourism, and there is lots of businesses, small businesses here, which are completely dedicated to tourism. And as long as this cannot be starting to develop their normal activities, there won't be a normal situation in the country. And this would trigger that the foreign investment won't come here. So it's like a chain. When the real economy here is not working, there will be no foreign investments. And if the foreign investment is not doing properly here, then the people who is here will be suffering higher taxation. And with higher taxation, we will have the power to invest in our local economies. So I think that governments are now in a situation that will have to balance and to take into account, particularly Spanish governments will have to take into account and balance if it really deserves a massive increase of taxes. Of course, I reject and I don't see a freezing of assets here or something like that. But well, I assume that there will be a rising of taxes. But I think that this will be compensated with other kind of incentives for small business, for example, because this is a real economy here in Spain.
It is. It is.
We don't have, well, we have some huge business like Telefónica or Banco Santander or wherever, but of course, almost 90% of the network of business in Spain is small and medium enterprises. And I think that is a moment to foster and to bet for this kind of business, which are, well, cutting edge, like for example, Zoom, like Darlene was suggesting, this kind of business that takes the opportunity of each moment. So I think there's a moment of that kind of things, and not to punish the individuals of the taxpayers. That's my opinion.
Nikolai?
There is always a downturn in the economy And well, generally, I think, I mean, the wealthy people I meet with, and let's say remotely meet with, obviously, they tend to be very accurate, and they adopt to the current environment. That's it. They're very accurate with their investments. They understand that with regards to their private investments, well, they look at the market and they see that there is kind of downturn. That's what they see, and they're very cautious. They're very accurate at the moment, so do not tend to be that aggressive as the last year with their investments. Well, with regards to domestic business they having here in Russia, they also tend to look some solutions just to survive with these COVID times and post-COVID times, when a lot of things are going online and go on a remote mode. So adopt and survive. That would be the strategy, and it effectively works. And what I like about the wealthy people, that they're very pragmatic. So they look at this as just another challenge. That's it, another task to be solved. So even though it is a hard time, so people tend to find solutions, find options.
Alexander?
Thank you very much, colleagues. I do agree with all of you. We should be ready. Well, professionally representing our clients. Our clients should be ready. Well, of course, for many changes. And well, for a new reality, and we should avoid investing in distressed assets. As a matter of fact, we should avoid investing in commodities also. Because all we see that nothing works as it worked before, and also we should take into account that our government has no any idea how to cope with the results of this crisis. They could do anything or everything they would like to do. We should be ready just to hide and to be ready to fight for our real obligations, not less, not more than prescribed by the law. And also mobility of our clients should be saved, and it is the only way how to, let's say, keep their businesses going well. Of course, it's very difficult to predict, but the future is not very obvious and not fair for everybody. We will see unpredictable changes. Thank you very much.
Could I ask one question first before we go?
Yeah,
Alexander, Alexander, I have a question for you.
Yes.
I'm sorry, could I ask
Yes,
one
please.
question? I apologize. You had mentioned something about, or maybe it was you, Nikolai, I don't remember which one of you, but the treaties that Russia has, you're saying that they are going to pull out or change or attempt to do away with some of the treaties or change the treaties that they have, the existing treaties? Was that you, Nikolai?
Yeah, that was me. Essentially, the government promoted the adjusting of the mechanism, how the treaties work with regards to dividends and to interest. So they have selected, cherry-picked certain jurisdictions that they historically been used for tax avoidance or tax planning schemes. And precisely, the government tackled these mechanisms. So they have promoted, let's say, extended tax rate for the dividends and for the interest. That's what they have promoted. And the mechanism, so that they promoted this through the mechanism of the protocol, signing of additional protocol. And the idea behind that, either you sign it or we just denounce the agreement itself. So obviously just not to, so either you sign it or quit it.
Somebody's twisting their arm.
Well, actually, regarding our double tax treaty with the United States, I think this convention wouldn't be any kind of affected by any attempts or initial from the Russian Federation, because the United States has its own type of convention that would remain uninfluenced.
I know. He's a law unto himself.
Yeah. And as a matter of fact, we should rely on the national tax regimes and tax legislations. I think for the future we would see the prevail that the national tax legislation would prevail over kind of international arrangements due to the process of tackling tax frauds and tax minimization or optimization.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
Okay.
Well, I think we covered most of what we wanted to cover, and I really want to thank you for joining us, Darlene, Nikolai, Alexander, Javier. It was a pleasure to have you here, and we hope we will see you at another meeting or physically in Moscow when we do have a conference in Ritz by the end of the year, hopefully. Let's see.
Okay. All right.